Akiba, thank you so much for that great introduction and greetings to everyone today. I am JaTaune Bosby Gilchrist. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as the Executive Director of the ACLU of Alabama. And we are based in Montgomery, which is the birthplace of the Civil Rights Movement. I am really excited to be in community with you all today, particularly because this is a really important conversation. Today is my official 8-year anniversary with the affiliate, but I started in development. So I know that this particular group that was intentionally assembled of leadership supporters and impact society members are so foundational to the work that we do at the ACLU. So I want to talk to you all one-to-one, right? And I know there's a big group, but we're having a real conversation specifically around reproductive access and voting rights. And today's conversation comes at a critical time. We are 1 year post the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson and the fall of Roe v. Wade, which has brought a flood of abortion bans across this country, and particularly a devastating ban in Alabama, which essentially criminalizes abortion. And looking ahead, we are about a year out from the critical 2024 election in which abortion rights and civil liberties writ large on the ballot. And we all know that the ACLU is working on all fronts to protect these rights and additionally to save our democracy. Knowing that voting rights directly impacts abortion and all of our civil liberties, we want to gather to talk about the overlapping and intersectional work of both of these critical core issues. And we're going to talk about not just the unique moment that we're in, but this broader movement of this work and intersectionality. And I'm really excited to bring in two ACLU experts that I'm very familiar with. First, we have Alexa Kolbi-Molinas, who is the Deputy Director of the ACLU's Reproductive Freedom Project. And we also have joining us Sophia Lin Lakin, who is the Interim Director of the ACLU's Voting Rights Project. Welcome to the two of you. I'm looking forward to chatting with you both today and really excited about where this conversation will go. But I do have a few housekeeping notes that I'd like to inform everyone of. Those of you who have joined us today, we want to remind you that this is an off the record conversation. So we know that we have a few journalists, so we're excited that y'all have joined us, but everything that is said here is not available for attribution or citation. We want to make sure that this is a safe space for folks to raise questions, and this is an intimate forum. And then at the end, we have carved out time for folks to ask questions to our experts. And I think that will be just a great opportunity to really follow up on some of the important things that you will hear today from both Alexa and Sophia. So let's jump into some of our questions. And I think that puts us in a good place. So with that, Sophia, if you can stick around, and Alexa, we will come back to you in just a little bit. Does that sound good? Okay. Sophia, I'd like to start with you as we focus on the ACLU's voting rights docket. So Sophia, almost a calendar year ago, October 4th of now 2022, you and I were on the steps of the Supreme Court together, and we participated in the arguments in the Allen v. Milligan case, which is a critical case around racial gerrymandering. There were so many folks that doubted our ability to win this case at the Supreme Court. But those of us who were on the front lines really knew the importance of coalition building, the strength of our plaintiffs and the work that they did in voting rights in this state, and how this case really opened up a national conversation about Black representation in the state of Alabama and broadly in the South and even in this country. So we were thrilled of the win over the summer. But I want you to share with us what that win means and what it opens up for us.
Yes, absolutely. And I I wanted to apologize for 1 second. There we go. I could not see me on the screen. I was worried that I was lost for a moment.
We
But
see you now. We got
but
you.
I while we were always optimistic that we would see the Supreme Court come through for us in the voting rights sphere, we'll say it did come as a bit of a surprise at the end of the day. But just as a reminder about how big this win really is for us kind of moving into the 2024 election cycle. In the fall of 2021, we at the national office brought 11 statewide redistricting challenges in 7 states with a focus on fair maps for Black voters in the South. And that was in light of the fact that this would be the first redistricting cycle without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. So we had active challenges in Alabama, of course, Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, and we were really pushing hard. And of course, there was this stay that came out of our Alabama congressional case. And then we ended up having to wait essentially a whole year before the Supreme Court finally came down with this historic win for voting rights in Alabama and the Voting Rights Act at large, and affirming the standards that we've been using, that we've been seeing success in to litigate these claims under the Voting Rights Act. And it just has given us incredible momentum in our fight for fair maps going forward. So we currently nationwide have 16 active redistricting cases. So of those 16, 12, I would say, are directly kind of impacted and have fresh momentum because of the win in the Milligan case. And we're pushing really hard as fast as we possibly can to get fair maps in place for 2024 as much as possible. So the Alabama team right now, as we speak, is fighting to ensure that an actual remedy that gives Black voters a true opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice in a second district, as they are supposed to have in light of the Supreme Court's order, are fighting at this moment in the Supreme Court again. I just led a 2-week trial in Georgia that ended last Friday in our case there that has moved forward quite rapidly, and we feel pretty good about how that went. And VRP, the Voting Rights Project itself, just alone has 4 other trials scheduled over the next 8 months, all with an aim to getting fair maps in place for elections to take place on those maps in 2024. So we're making up for as much lost time as we possibly can with the wind at our backs due to this Milligan decision. We feel good about getting some new maps in place, at least in some of these places ahead of 2024.
Thank you so much for that, Sophia. And I just want to name, you said something that really affirms all of this work. We are consistently hearing rhetoric, particularly in Alabama, from our state officials who are actively trying to suppress the vote. Just last week, the state appealed to the Supreme Court that upheld the lower court that the maps that they presented in 2021 were indeed unconstitutional. So we are pleased with the lower court's decision. So just so folks know, we have September 25th, which we're going to see hopefully 3 new congressional maps from the special master and the demographer, and we'll have a hearing on October 3rd. But I just want to emphasize and thank you for the work that you're doing, not just in Alabama, but across the country, to ensure representation in community, and particularly for Black voters. I wanted to transition a bit because you stated something, right? We are trying to do what's right, and make up for lost time. And while we're grateful for the Milligan decision, it comes at a cost, and we know this all too well. So can you remind us how many bills were introduced this past legislative session that were really focused on restricting voter access? And then how many more bills are we expecting possibly in 2024?
So just this past year, we've seen at least 322 restrictive bills introduced in 45 states, and there's no reason to think that this pace won't continue as we head into the new year. Along with new incarnations of various ballot access restrictions that we've seen kind of crop up in different forms over the years, like restrictions on mail ballots, barriers to voter registration, voting purges, voter challenges, and the like. We're also seeing a lot of different kinds of things, like more efforts to criminalize different aspects of the ballot box. So I think many people have probably heard about these efforts to criminalize people providing food and water to people waiting in the very, very long lines in Georgia. That's just one example of what we're seeing. And we're also seeing, really troubling, I would say, more targeting of civic organizations that help voters overcome these barriers. I think there's a realization that there are so many people on the ground who are going to put in the time and the effort to ensure that despite these barriers, we are going to help voters access the franchise no matter what the cost. And now we're seeing really, really aggressive targeting of these organizations, making it much more difficult for them to help voters overcome these existing barriers. And so this is a really critical time, as we've talked about, in the lead up to the 2024 elections. If we want to push back against restrictive voting measures, because of the so-called Purcell principle, this idea that courts shouldn't change election rules in the period close to an election. We don't know exactly what that time frame is, but we need to be doing this work now in these months in the lead up to the primary elections coming in the spring. And so we are pushing really hard against as many of these restrictions as we possibly can. So just this past summer, in addition to all the redistricting work that's we're trying to push forward, we've been litigating we have had 11 cases in 7 states over the last year. And just this summer, we've gotten wins in 4 states, in Georgia, on 2 different provisions related to the monster SB 202 bill, in Florida, in Mississippi, and Texas. And, we're really starting to see the fruits of our labor in terms of some of the shifts that we have made to address these kinds of tactics ahead of the 2024 elections, given the hostile federal courts, to a shift in, for example, state-to-state courts, where we've seen wins in Montana on ballot access issues. We've also really pushed hard on the First Amendment. So, for example, in Florida, we filed a new lawsuit challenging a ban there that on non-citizens, including longtime permanent residents, from participating in any kind of voter registration efforts. And we challenged that because it chills political speech, that of encouraging community members to participate in the political process. And we won a preliminary injunction there. We've also been trying to focus on less used aspects of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, other statutes. And we've seen a lot of success on this front as well, including for immaterial paperwork errors in places like Texas, in Georgia, and in Pennsylvania as well. And so we're pushing on all fronts. We're using all our diverse sort of set of tactics and trying to get as many wins as possible. Tomorrow, there is a preliminary injunction hearing in our Georgia case as well on our claim of intentional discrimination there. And so, like I said, the work is happening in this moment now to change the rules and make them more open in as many places, on as many lanes for voter access as we possibly can, to ensure that the 2024 elections are as open as possible.
In as many places, in as many lanes. I want to elevate that because that's so important. You also stated that there's just such a value in the community organizations on the ground and how we're seeing state legislators actively target those community organizations that are really, truly invested in ensuring people have access to the ballot. I want to transition just a bit because there's been so much infrastructure building. I know we've been doing it in Alabama for many years, but the state of Georgia is a prime example of that infrastructure, election, and public education building that is so important. And I would like for you to share, if around this work, in some of these priority states, I mentioned Georgia, but we know we have several battleground states. how are we going to see these efforts help abortion rights and other civil liberties on the line? These community-based organizations that are truly invested, we know the litigation work, we know the advocacy work, but those organizations on the ground really help direct and guide how we focus this work. So I want to know, how is that voting rights work going to impact abortion rights and other civil liberties on the line this year?
So, I mean, it's really true. Voting is the gateway right, and if people don't have access to the ballot, they don't have access to influence all of the range of issues that we care about deeply, including abortion rights, trans justice, and every other kind of policy you could possibly care about. And there's great work being done, both at the sort of battleground initiative, sort of these states that you would consider to be battlegrounds, as well as in the Southern Collective, as JaTaune, as you've been lifting up, to really say, how can we support the election infrastructure on the ground, that's being community groups and making sure that they have what they need to do work, but also supporting county elections officials. Have been pilot programs to be in partnership with these people who play very critical roles in ensuring that elections run smoothly, that people follow the rules, that votes are counted. They've been facing intimidation, threats, and the like. So partnerships with ensuring county election officials get support, but also just things like volunteer recruitment programs for poll workers, ensuring that there are people in place in the busiest parts of our country to ensure that the people are getting through the lines, again, to support the infrastructure on the ground, to make sure elections are running as smoothly as possible. And those are just a handful of examples.
Thank you so much for that. Just great context on uplifting organizations and affiliates that are already doing this work. And thank you for elevating the importance of the Southern Collective. I think it dovetails into really what I want to talk about, and how the Milligan decision was so timely and underscores the larger arc of history that puts Alabama at the forefront of voting rights. So we talk about the 1965 Voting Rights Act, and then Shelby v. Holder, which we acknowledge 10 years since that decision, and what Milligan has done this year in preserving aspects of the VRA. And just to underscore what you said, the right to vote is truly foundational for all civil liberties. And that truly is the case for every aspect of this work, particularly as it relates to abortion rights this year. We know that we have seen that on the ballot. That's been at the forefront for so many individuals. And I'd like to transition into a real conversation about reproductive access in this country. So Sophia, thank you so much, but I really want to bring Alexa into this conversation. All right. Alexa, you are up and ready. Thank you so much. So
I'm ready.
Yes, thank you. Alexa, you've been a trailblazer on the front of ensuring reproductive access across the country, but specifically in Alabama. You've been invested in the work in Alabama, I believe, for over a decade now. Deeply appreciative, but for your work in the ACLU, abortion would not have been accessible in Alabama long before the fall of Roe. And so I do want to take time to acknowledge that. So last year's decision and the overturning of Roe v. Wade, it was a galvanizing moment for abortion rights, with 8 in 10 Americans supporting the legal right to abortion. But even before Roe, we knew specifically in Alabama that there was a constant attack on abortion rights and reproductive health care. So I'd like to know right now, can you share what the current landscape looks like and what we're facing across the country?
Sure. I mean, last year's decision in Dobbs really just was as bad as we feared. It was a green light to extremist politicians across the country to ban abortion and to force women and other people who can become pregnant into a second-class status by depriving them of control over their bodies and their futures. Today, there are 16 states in the country that ban abortion either throughout pregnancy or at its earliest stages, before many people even know that they're pregnant, or where abortion is just otherwise inaccessible. But I want to really underscore when I say today, because that number is changing regularly because we are fighting back. Indeed, we jumped into action the day Dobbs was decided, and we haven't stopped, as the bags under my eyes, I'm sure, can attest. Right now, we have ongoing litigation just around abortion bans in 7 states and in Guam. And I actually think our case in Guam really sort of illustrates the stakes that we're talking about here. If it wasn't for our case, our ongoing case right now, there would be a total abortion ban in effect in Guam, and people on the island would be 4,000 miles away from the nearest legal abortion provider. Unfortunately, as you know all too well, these extremist politicians, though, they're not going to be content with stopping with just banning abortion within their own borders. And they are now trying to make it harder for people to leave their states and seek legal abortions elsewhere, which is truly chilling. And so we have 2 cases ongoing about this right now. We have sued the Idaho Attorney General, who has threatened to criminalize physicians merely for providing information and referrals to their patients for legal abortions in other states. And in Alabama, we have sued the Alabama Attorney General once again, this time for threatening to use criminal laws like conspiracy to throw people in jail just for helping someone cross state lines to access legal medical care in another case. And that's not just physicians. Under his interpretation of these laws, a husband can be thrown in jail for driving his wife across the border. A mother-in-law can go to jail for lending her daughter-in-law $500 for the abortion. As I said, it is truly chilling, and unfortunately, we think we will see more and more of this to come, but we are very prepared to resist. We have been working closely with our colleagues in the Speech Privacy and Technology Project around the First Amendment claims here, and have developed a number of other innovative legal claims, including around the fundamental right to travel, which is really central to being a part of this country, that we are using to fight back. So we are prepared, but it is something truly nefarious, I think, on the agenda to come.
Thank you for that context, Alexa. And just a small note, you all sued the Attorney General and also 42 DAs in the state of Alabama. I want to name how critical that is, setting that precedent that regardless of where you are,
yes,
this is indeed unconstitutional. So again, I just want to underscore the importance of that work. You named something else. You talked about they will continue to go further, right? So right now there is a total ban on abortion in Alabama, and not just a total ban on abortion, it is criminalized for individuals assisting people, physicians, and it goes on, but it is the contraception and the ability to take that into your own hands, right? So medication. So I really would like to get some context on the case brought by abortion opponents to take medication abortion off the shelves. Where does that case stand right now?
Yes, well, I mean, that case is another perfect example of how this was never just going to stop with the states. The case you mentioned is Alliance for Hippocratic Medicine versus the FDA. And what it is an attempt to ban abortion nationwide, even in states where it remains legal and protected. The case basically targets the FDA's approval and regulation of mifepristone. So mifepristone is a safe and effective medication that is used in more than half of abortions in the United States, and is also the standard of care for miscarriage management. Over 4 million women have used mifepristone since it was first approved by the FDA over 20 years ago. So this suit was filed by abortion opponents, anti-abortion groups, really in the months after Dobbs, and they deliberately selected the district in Texas where they were going to file, so they could guarantee that at the district court and appellate court level, they would have the judges who were most conservative and hostile to abortion. And those judges have been playing their parts to perfection so far. In fact, the earliest decisions in this case were so extreme in terms of the federal courts attempting to basically second guess the FDA's authority and expertise when it comes to medications broadly, that the Supreme Court has already gotten involved. The Supreme Court last April issued an emergency stay, and that requires at least 5 justices to sign on to it. An emergency stay that basically says, while this case is working through the courts, none of your decisions are allowed to take effect until we, the Supreme Court, get to weigh in. And it was just a few weeks ago that the FDA and the manufacturers of mifepristone officially petitioned the Supreme Court to hear this case. So we expect that they will hear it next year, during the current term, but next year. But really, even though these decisions from the lower courts haven't taken effect yet because of the stay, the sheer breadth of what they would do really cannot be understated, right? First, it would put a safe and the most common abortion method in the country at risk. Second, it would create utter turmoil for the FDA, for scientific research, and for access to much needed medications in this country well beyond abortion. And I have to think that that is why the Supreme Court, or at least part of why the Supreme Court was motivated to get involved so soon, because this really is, again, so extreme that it can't be limited to abortion. And indeed, legal scholars across the political spectrum, including many conservative legal scholars, have resoundingly, criticized the lower court opinions in this case, the reasoning, the analysis, the conclusions. And so this is something we are definitely watching, given the risk that it presents, but it is so extreme that we are really hopeful that the Supreme Court does the right thing.
Alexa, what you have stated, just it hits in several different ways, and I have to kind of insert a bit of a fundraising story here, a donor story here. I remember not long, right after, literally the day of the fall of Roe, the Dobbs decision, I had a conversation with an elder. And when you have conversations and you really don't know what to say, you have to be honest. And I said, it's difficult, but where do we go from here? Someone who had been an activist, a devout feminist in this work for decades. And she looks at me and she says, well, you'll do what we did and you'll build it better and you'll build it stronger and it will take time. And that's someone who understood this work for the long haul. So I want to ask you, we know the fall of Roe, we know what it did in states like Alabama. And what I think has been valuable for us, particularly at this affiliate, is that we've had to shift this conversation to talk about comprehensive reproductive health care. And so in this state, we have one of the highest rates of maternal and infant mortality. And that rate is even higher for Black women and their babies. So in that space of we have to build it better, I'm really proud that our affiliate, particularly the Reproductive Freedom Project, has also understood we've got to build it better. We have to address reproductive health care, comprehensive reproductive health care writ large. So can you tell us a little bit about the case in which we are representing doulas and midwives in the state of Alabama?
Yes, I'm very excited to talk about this litigation. It's really first of its kind litigation. And I think it's very important that it's in Alabama, particularly. So we are representing midwives and also OBGYNs, all of whom have come together basically because they want to expand access to pregnancy-related care. But what they are facing is what is essentially a de facto ban on freestanding birth centers in Alabama. And it is because of this ban that they are being prohibited from expanding access to care, much needed care, to their communities. For folks who don't know, birth centers are places where midwifery-led care is provided to low-risk, healthy pregnant patients in a home-like, out-of-hospital environment. And there is overwhelming evidence that these places are not only safe, but actually have been shown to improve certain maternal and infant health outcomes. Happens to be the same maternal and infant health sort of measures that Alabama is doing the worst on, but to improve these outcomes better than hospital births. And indeed, it's not just that Alabama has a number of maternity care deserts, right, where there's no prenatal care or hospitals or childbirth care at all. That's bad enough. But the trend is not getting better. Labor and delivery units are continuing to close across the state, and those hospitals that remain are stretched to capacity. The doctors in our case have testified that they have had patients delivering in operating rooms, laboring in hallways, because there simply isn't enough space. So it's not just that expanding access to birth centers would allow people to bring much needed pregnancy related care to places where there is none, but it also would relieve the burden on hospitals and physicians and allow them to focus on higher risk patients who need to be seen in a hospital setting and make sure that they can get the care they deserve. But of course, the same state, Alabama, that has brought you a total abortion ban and is forcing its citizens to continue their pregnancies against their will, is also blocking access to expanding this much needed care during pregnancy. So that is why we've gone to court. And in fact, we will be going to trial on this in Montgomery next week.
So I'm going to see you next week.
Yes, you will.
But I want to emphasize that midwives and doulas and folks that are providing this critical care really do give us hope. And so thank you for standing with them and representing them in this way. It means more than you realize, particularly for communities of color, particularly for Black communities, and particularly for individuals who are facing this ever-growing challenge. So thank you for that. You've spoken to the ACLU's power in supporting communities that face inequities with multifaceted solutions. So I am just such, this is one of the cases that I'm most proud of in being with this organization. So in this conversation, we've learned about expanding the narrative around reproductive rights and abortion. At the ACLU of Alabama, once the fall of Roe happened and the Dobbs decision impacted our state, we knew that we had to change the framing because abortion access was no longer available. And so we are now looking at this broader conversation of comprehensive reproductive healthcare access. And we're doing that through the frame of racial justice, but reproductive justice as it aligns with that concept. And we identify this broader issue as gender justice. And that particular issue is also trans inclusive. For example, our independent clinics that have been our clients forever, we're also providing care for trans folks. And for me, that reinforces that our work is always intersectional, and policies like this impact several factions of our communities. That is always front and center as we address these issues and these policies that can be so damaging to our communities. So I am happy about this broadening, but also it fortifies me to know that this fight is for the long haul. So again, thank you for your work. I actually want to transition us now and kind of bring this all together, kind of amend the soil, bring it all together, because it's been so rich and important. But the truth of the matter is we have a critical election next year in 2024. And we all know that each of us in our states are ramping up electoral work, whether it's the ACLU or other organizations, but all of our strategies are going to be necessary for this next election, and quite honestly, for this next decade. And so I'd like to talk about the strategies that we're employing across the South and throughout our battleground states. And I really want to hear from you both about what people can do to fight at the ballot box. Okay, so we know that the Supreme Court has overturned Roe, and we are actively fighting to protect abortion rights, not just in the areas where there's a ban, but in states in which abortion is already legal. So what are some things that states can do on this front? So we're talking about, state constitutions and electing state Supreme Court justices who support reproductive freedom. So Alexa, let's start with you. Can you share some of our recent successes on this front? I think that this is really important.
Yes, and it's always nice to be able to talk about good news and uplifting uplifting issues. So abortion is winning big at the ballot. Last year, the ACLU, together with supporters, volunteers, affiliates, partners, came together in Kansas and Kentucky to protect abortion rights. and to enshrine protection for abortion in the Michigan, Vermont, and California constitutions. And we won every measure. And we were especially proud and honored to be one of the earliest contributors to the Michigan effort, from the first conversations to ultimately contributing over $5 million to that campaign. And the Kansas ballot measure too was a particularly meaningful one, because that election actually came just 6 weeks after Dobbs. So it was a test of where we stood. And the win in a place like Kansas showed us what we can achieve and really showed us where we were headed with this, which was good. So this year, we have come together, our affiliate and partner organizations, to enshrine protection for abortion in Ohio. Now, our opponents knew, especially when they saw what happened last year, they knew they were never going to win this on the issue alone. And so that's why extremist politicians in Ohio, they actually pushed through an emergency ballot measure to try to change the rules around ballot measures to make it harder to enact ballot measures. But I'm very excited to say that just this past August, on a special election in August, on this emergency ballot measure, over 3 million voters came out across the state of Ohio to resoundingly reject what was essentially a measure to strip them of their ability to vote to protect their own rights. That was a great victory, but unfortunately, our opponents they're not going to stop there. And when they couldn't change the rules, what they've done now is they are putting a very confusing and misleading ballot summary to the voters, which unfortunately the Ohio Supreme Court has just allowed to move ahead. So all of that is to say that this isn't over. And as more and more states in that region lose access to abortion, protecting it in Ohio is becoming even more important than ever. Folks can visit, I think the website will be in the chat, but it's Ohioans United for Reproductive Rights.win. They can visit that website to directly support the ballot committee and to learn more about that campaign.
Thank you for mentioning Kansas and how that really helped set a precedent. And I think that really energized so many of us that felt defeated. So I want to transition to this. I think it goes well. So Sophia, with everything that's going on, we know that the ACLU is uniquely equipped to lead on this work. We have an incredible community of organizers and advocates who are ready to communicate, to advocate zealously in the courtroom, in the state house, in these communities. How are we mobilizing to move folks to action? So we heard about Kansas, we heard about what's coming in Ohio, but what are we doing to actually mobilize folks? I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, there's so much that's happening and that we're gearing up for as we're entering this new election cycle and very critical election cycle. We are pushing out voter education tools, which we hope will both educate and energize our millions of supporters and activists to really stand up for civil liberties and civil rights, to know what's on the ballot, to be able to actively push back against misinformation, disinformation, but to ensure that people are aware of what's happening in terms of attacks on reproductive freedom, transgender justice, systemic equality, immigrants' rights, and how they can impact those issues by voting. It sounds very simple, but I think really having the tools to educate people around you about where people stand on these issues, where these issues are on the ballot, can really, really make a difference, especially now when so many of our policies and issues are happening at the state level. We're planning to launch an interactive voting rights website, which will provide people the ability to look up this information about candidates, cases, how to get involved. We're launching a new Democracy Defenders Initiative, which would be to mobilize our membership to be able to provide information to people who want to get involved, to people who want to be called upon, call to action, and things like advocacy for federal and state legislation that expand access to the franchise or protect voting rights. So, for example, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act was just reintroduced in Congress yesterday, I believe, or maybe it was earlier this week. And just being able to provide that support as we continue to move momentum to get this legislation passed. It's hard to maintain that momentum in this time, this very divisive time at the federal level, but it needs to be there if we're ever going to get it done. But also, there's a ton that's happening at the state level. So state voting rights acts, other laws that either re-enfranchise returning citizens, that expand early voting, that expand access to mail ballots and the like. But we also want to be able to call on people to help, for example, with these ballot initiatives that Alexa mentioned. They range on issues, including one that we are hoping to push forward on, one that we would like to see being pushed forward on redistricting reform, for example, and being able to mobilize people to help with those efforts, to provide support and information about these efforts, and show up and shed light and transparency on many things that happen behind the scenes in our battle against voter suppression measures as well.
Thank you both for sharing that. And I want to be mindful of time. We want to make sure that we get some of these questions in from folks who are joining us. And so I want to get to this next question. I really want to hear from you all. I would like to hear from each of you just one tangible action for us as we head into this next election cycle. What's one tangible action that we can take away? Alexa, I'm going to go with you first, and then Sophia, if you can follow up. One big one that we need to keep in mind.
I mean, it's really quite simple, because I feel like Sophia has just covered it, right? Elections matter, right? And that shows why the work that Sophia and her colleagues are doing is so important, and how it's so inextricably linked to all of our rights. So what I think I would just drill down on for folks when thinking about, taking action around reproductive rights and elections is that don't just think about what happens in November, right? What happened in Ohio, this critical defense of democracy, was an August election, right? So don't just think about November, and don't, like Sophia said, focus only on federal candidacy. Obviously, though, that's important. But so much, particularly around abortion, is now being determined at the state level. And so it's state officials, it's state Supreme Court justices, critically, it's these elections that people should be really educated and mobilized around. So that, I think, is the tangible action, I think I would say.
Thank you for that. Sophia.
So the classic one is vote. Please go vote. But what I would say is tell and ensure that 10 other people who would not otherwise vote also goes out and votes with you.
I love that. So two things, I'm going to wrap it up. Politics is local. Alexa, I think that you said that politics is local. Let's focus on what we can do. And Sophia, bring somebody with you. Bring somebody with you. Thank you both. Thank you both. Okay, now we are going to transition to Q&A. We're going to do our best to answer all the questions that we can, but we are running short on time. So for them today, we will get to them. We're actually going to drop a link in the chat so you can email your questions if we are unable to get to them. But Makiba, I am going to turn it over to you so we can ask this first batch of questions.
Thanks, JaTaune. So we have 2 questions so far. The first one is for Alexa. What is the ACLU doing to help people who are investigated or prosecuted in this post-Roe world? And then a question for Sophia. What's the best way to address election tampering and interference in our communities?
Yeah, that is it's incredibly important issue, and one that we are taking very, very seriously. So last year, a number of stakeholders from reproductive rights, reproductive health, reproductive justice organizations all came together to talk about what are the unmet needs in the wake of Dobbs. And of course, not surprisingly, one of those most important needs that was identified was ensuring that people who are investigated or prosecuted, whether it's for having an abortion, providing an abortion, helping someone access an abortion, that those people have access to high quality criminal defense. And what everyone agreed at this meeting was that the ACLU should be the one to really take up this mantle, because we are a multi-issue organization. It's not just experts in abortion, it's experts in criminal law reform, criminal justice, criminal defense. And of course, we have our affiliate structure. Right? We are already tapped into the local defense bar in every state across the country. So I'm very excited to say that in March, we launched the Abortion Criminal Defense Initiative, which has two goals. It is to ensure that anyone investigated or prosecuted for having, providing, or helping someone access an abortion has access to high quality criminal defense, but also to provide training, support, and education to the lawyers who are going to be providing that representation. And what I can say is that while we fortunately haven't seen any prosecutions yet, what we have been able to do is connect people with representation simply in their interactions with law enforcement. And I have to think that the fact that we are intervening so early and able to provide people with representation so early in the process is actually deterring these conversations from developing into investigations and prosecutions. So I'm really excited about that. But yes, that is something we are very, very focused on.
So turning to the question that I was asked, which is, for a reminder, what's the best way to address election tampering and interference in our community? And I'm going to answer as many answers to this particular question. I think it's a very big question, but in terms of what concrete actions that we as individuals can take, I would say get involved. There are a couple of ways that I would say this. Either serve, there are plenty of ways to volunteer in the election protection hotline work, but also serving as a poll worker, showing up to county boards of elections meetings. These happen. A lot of things happen during this meeting, including mass voter challenges in places where that's permissible, where voters don't even know their votes are being challenged and they're being thrown out. So there's a lot that you as an individual can certainly do to know what's going on, understand your election system, understand where the risks may happen, where interference or tampering could happen, and provide support to the critical people on the ground who are actually that first line of defense against these kinds of things. Many of these county elections officials who are just trying to do their job, they're trying to follow the rules, they're trying to get it work done, but people are trying to make it difficult for these individuals. So get involved. There are many different ways you can do that at this level. And I think that's the best way for so many of us to really work to protect our infrastructure and our systems ourselves.
All right, we have a few more questions that's coming in through the panel. This next one is from Ruth. Will more women and younger generation candidates who believe in reproductive rights in state and local political positions help turn things around? And another is, what should I do if I see an election volunteer asking for an ID when it isn't required in my state?
I'll take the first one. So yes, because I think one of the things I think that led us to the situation where we ended up with in Dobbs was that we did not have enough politicians and not enough state and local politicians willing to put their money where their mouth is when it came to protecting access to abortion. And in a lot of ways, I think a lot of politicians hid behind us lawyers, right? Because they knew they didn't have to take the risk on voting against an abortion ban because the ACLU will just come in and sue and prevent the abortion ban from taking effect. So they don't lose anything and still, abortion remains legal. But, while we are continuing to use courts and state constitutions wherever we can to protect people as much as we can, Dobbs really had an influence on how the courts are going to consider challenges to abortion bans. And we need to see more politicians willing to step up to protect these rights and willing to pass laws that can enshrine protections, right? Not just abortion bans. So yeah, absolutely. I think that could and hopefully will help turn things around.
And in terms of if you've witnessed someone asking for an ID or any other kind of rule that's not in place, and you know that's not in place in your state, I think there are two things you certainly can do. One is try to talk to whoever's the supervisor in that polling location. You want to make sure that the information is disseminated across the board to people who are working in those in the poll worker roles there, and you don't want to escalate in that particular moment. The second thing, in addition, I would say to that, is also call the election protection hotline, 1-866 our vote, and report it, because people like me and other people working in the hotline will ensure that we call the county supervisor and ensure kind of follow up and make sure that the proper rules are being enforced across the board in a more global level. And if we see a bigger problem happening in many polling places across the board, we can see it at that level. So definitely report it, and I would say take it to the supervisor of the location, and they can ensure that everyone gets the same information and is properly following the rules.
All right, thank you both for your answers. Those were great. And thank you for everyone for asking such necessary and important questions. You that we did not get to, please email us your questions at leadershipforum@aclu.org. We are going to wrap up because I'm just so excited and grateful for the time that you all have given to us today. I'm excited because I am optimistic. I'm energized. When we are so entrenched in this work, it gets tough, but conversations like this really allow us the ability to pause, to talk about where we are, and then to look forward. So thank you both for joining us today. This has been incredible, a really great conversation. And I hope those of you who join this conversation also feel energized as you are going back home, talking with your friends in community, and have some real direction on what you can be doing. I'm just really appreciative of this time, but I want to elevate something that I think crystallizes all of this. I am reading a book now. It's on my desk. So it is called To Shape a New World. It is a compilation of essays that is focused on Dr. King's work. And one of these essays, it talks about conscientious citizenship and the famous quote that states, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." What it does is it ties us to the issues of injustice as a community. And so collectively, we have a lot of work ahead of us. And both Sophia and Alexa have underscored that. But collectively, in gatherings like this, it reminds us of the incredible community fueling this work. It's our staff, it's our organizers, it's our attorneys, it's our volunteers, it's our advocates on the ground, and it's all of you, because we are collectively invested in this work. So thank you all for joining us today in this conversation. Thank you for marching with us as we press forward. Thank you for standing with us in this work. And thank you for your commitment. We look forward to connecting with you and being in community. So onward, you all be well. Thank you.